Hegseth reportedly used his personal phone to disclose information about U.S. military operations in Yemen. This is a different group chat situation. This is another Signal group chat where he shared sensitive information to sources with knowledge of the matter. Tell NBC News 13 people were in the chat, including Hegseth's wife and brother. The sources say Hegseth sent the messages after an aide warned him to not share sensitive information on Signal. Okay, this comes a month after the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, revealed the Trump administration accidentally added him to a Signal group attack plans. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has taken responsibility for creating that message chain. According to the New York Times, the other group chat was started by Hegseth. The secretary shared essentially the same information in both groups, including the flight schedules for the military jets that targeted the Houthis.
Oh my gosh.
The information was reportedly sent to both chats at roughly the same time. What's going on here? 4 people familiar with the chat tell the New York Times that Hegseth's chat was named Defense Team Huddle, and it did not include any other cabinet-level officials. It was initially created as a forum for discussing routine, administrative, or scheduling information. Sources tell the paper Hegseth did not usually discuss sensitive military operations. Hegseth's chat included his wife, who is a former Fox News producer and not a Defense Department employee. His brother and personal lawyer were also in the chat. They both have jobs in the Pentagon, but it's not known why they would need to know anything about attack plans in Yemen. In a statement, the chief Pentagon spokesperson denied any classified information was shared in either of the Signal chats. Let's bring in one of the reporters of that piece, New York Times reporter Greg Jaffe. Also with us, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. His military career spans more than 3 decades of service, including as the commanding general of the U.S. Army Europe and the 7th Army. So we'll get to that in a moment. But first, Mr. Jaffe, more on your reporting. I almost felt like we were reporting on the first Signal scandal. It seems so similar. Tell us more about who he included in this chat and why perhaps this is the same thing happening all over again.
Yeah, so the chat, as you noted, included his wife, his brother, his personal attorney, and most of his inner circle, which has been in a state of tumult these last couple of weeks. And I think it's worth noting it's a very inexperienced inner circle, and he's a very inexperienced secretary. So it's a group of people who hadn't been used to operating at this level of government. And I think that's the other kind of key point here. He doesn't have a lot of experience at senior officials, and he's surrounding himself with people who also kind of lack experience.
You know, General, I was just a little congressman, one of 435. So on the Armed Services Committee, we would get information, and we understood we didn't tell a soul. It didn't tell a soul. Nobody. Not even staff members. Not family, certainly not family members. I'm just curious, you've operated actually on such a higher level where the lives of our men and women in uniform were at risk if information got out. I mean, even on my small level, this is so hard to comprehend. I wonder how shocking it must be for you, who understands this sort of recklessness could lead to lost American lives.
It is pretty shocking, Joe. What I'll say to you, yes, I've been given information from confidential all the way up to top secret code word. And the rules are when individuals are given access to national security information, intelligence, there are 2 ironclad standards. You protect classified, critical, and sensitive information, and you only share it with those who have a clearance and with a legitimate need to know. And you certainly don't share it with your wife, your family members, or those you're trying to impress. Doing anything else betrays trust, and it violates the standards that all officials learn. When someone with access to sensitive information passes it to a favored journalist, a friendly voice in the media, a spouse or a family member, someone without clearance, without a key role in the operations, and without a need to know, that's not patriotism, that's performance politics. It's reckless and it's dangerous. It risks operations, it endangers lives, and it weakens U.S. credibility around the world. It also sends the key message that keeping our nation secure is optional, and the people that are doing this truly fully don't understand what our enemies can collect under from a resource like a Signals app on a private phone. It's just amazing to me. It's infuriating, and I think most people who have clearances understand the same thing.
Well, and General, here we're starting with the semantics game again with the initial statements from the DOD that this was not classified information. Have you ever known the scheduling of an operation, when fighter jets are going to be taking off, when they're going to be making their strikes? Have you ever known that in all of your years of not being the most highly classified information that a SecDef would hold?
Yeah, they're playing word games with this, Joe. It may not have a classification stamp on the top that says secret or top secret or classified, but it's critical and sensitive information. And that falls under the category of the Department of Defense regulations, too. You don't have to have a stamp on the top of a piece of paper to understand that anything like this could fall into the hands of our enemies or even forces on the ground, and they can put pieces of a puzzle together. That's what intelligence folks do. You know, it's fascinating to me. We have such tremendous people in our intelligence communities and all of the agencies, from the military agencies all the way up to the CIA. And it's fascinating to me that every single one of them would tell you that our enemies can take these pieces of a puzzle, put them together, and determine things like just the way people talk, the way they act. When I was in Europe, or when I was in many jobs, we used to give commanders, you know, one of my intelligence folks would give me a black book before I went to have an engagement with a foreign dignitary or a foreign army. It was collections on those individuals to give me a better advantage. So we can talk about the art of the deal, but when you're talking about the art of engagement, it gives you an advantage when you have intelligence about what people are doing, about their personal habits, about their ego and their hubris. And I got to tell you, the information on these chats that are being shown by Jeff Goldberg and others are just staggering. It's jaw-dropping to me that anybody can say that's not important information that our enemies can gain a lot from.
So to broaden this out a little bit, Jonathan Lemire, I know you're going to go to Greg on his reporting, but to add to this, the Secretary of Defense's wife and brother, I believe there's been reporting that they have been included on some meetings as well. So the question is, what is their role?
Yeah, there's been questions about just the setup at the Pentagon surrounding the Secretary of Defense, who appears to be very isolated in the building. His wife is there, his brother is there, other close confidants nearby at all times. Why there's been eyebrows raised about how his wife has been in sort of very sensitive meetings with foreign governments. We should note, though, the Pentagon put out a statement about this. We haven't heard from the Secretary of Defense himself, except a Twitter reply to the Democrats, like the political organization. He attacked them simply saying, "Your agenda is illegals, trans, and DEI." That's his comment. He made a political swipe at the Democratic Party as opposed to addressing the matter at hand. That's all we've heard from the Secretary of Defense. So, Greg, terrific reporting. Tell us more also about this moment at the Pentagon where there's been a wave of high-profile resignations, people working with the Secretary, one of whom wrote an op-ed for Politico last night saying that the building is in chaos, suggesting that President Trump push out the Secretary of Defense. We haven't heard anything from the president just yet. But talk to us about this moment there at DOD.
Yeah, it's really unlike anything I've seen in the kind of 20 years that I've been following the building. To have the secretary's inner circle kind of turn on each other this way, that's really, really unprecedented. And as far as I can tell, it's the infighting is not really over policy or anything like that. It's just kind of, I think, who has the secretary's ear, how meetings should be run. It's just a really, really chaotic environment. And you get the sense that there's just a lack of process around the secretary in terms of just how to run the office on a day-to-day basis. Just basic function is not happening.
You know, this doesn't happen without a context. You've had a purge of the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, any number of other 4-stars. Now you've had this. Mark, I was really curious. Two things come to mind. One is, what is morale like now? You know, you've got obviously civilian primacy, but you know, you have a civilian running the Pentagon who's violating rules that if any of the people under his command did, they would be stripped of rank and they'd be out of their jobs or worse. So to what extent does this matter in a sense? Do you actually think readiness is being affected by this, that recruitment's being affected by this, discipline? What is your sense of, because what's going on is so unprecedented and so wrong. What do you see as the consequences?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it's certainly going to affect our alliances, because when you see this kind of leakage and just a lack of responsibility and a lack of adherence to standards on what you share or don't share with intelligence, alliances are going to stop sharing things with us. They have already done that. In terms of the morale, I can't comment on that because I'm not in the Pentagon, but I have talked to others in the force who are in the operational army, and they're shaking their head. They're saying, this is ridiculous. Everyone should know this. Why is this individual doing these kind of things? And most, even the younger members of our military, implications of these kind of things being leaked. They are repeatedly told, don't use your personal cell phone when you're in a government building. Don't pass information that could be sensitive on your personal cell phone. The other thing that I'd comment that, the military or the government pays a lot of money for encrypted devices and things that can pass this kind of information, from SIPRnet computers to the kinds of cell phones that are encrypted. And even though, Signal's app is allegedly encrypted, I will tell you for sure, because I've seen it, any government in the world can break into that encryption and find out information from it. So people who think they're smart and say, hey, I'm just going to use Signals and it'll be encrypted and it'll disappear in a week, that's great, but it can still be hacked by government sources. And then
Today, we are learning some new details following reports of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sharing some detailed military plans in a second Signal group chat that included his wife, a lawyer, and his brother. Multiple sources telling CNN Hegseth revealed strike plans against Houthi targets in Yemen, similar to what was shared in that other group chat, which came to light after the editor of The Atlantic was mistakenly added to it. We've also learned that Hegseth directly addressed the matter with President Trump during a phone call last night. Earlier today, the president defended Hegseth.
He's doing a great job. It's just fake news. They just bring up stories. I guess it sounds like disgruntled employees. He was put there to get rid of a lot of bad people, and that's what he's doing. So you don't always have friends when you do that.
The revelation of a second Signal chat emerging as some of Hegseth's closest advisors, several of whom were fired last week, are warning that the Pentagon has become dysfunctional under Hegseth's leadership. Both Hegseth and White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt railed against those accusations.
This is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations.
The president stands strongly behind Secretary Hegseth, who is doing a phenomenal job leading the Pentagon. And this is what happens when the entire Pentagon is working against you and working against the monumental change that you are trying to implement.
With us now to talk more about this is John Bolton. He served as National Security Advisor during President Trump's first term. How bad do you think this is, I wonder, having his wife, his brother, his lawyer included on what sources describe as military plans of these Houthi strikes, similar to what came to light during that first Signal chat scandal?
Well, I think after people got over the disbelief at the first Signal chat group, it's no surprise there are others. What makes this one worse and different is that it's kind of a friends and family Signal chat group, none of whom have any need to know what's been conveyed about potential strikes in Yemen before they actually happen. I mean, it speaks to a lack of judgment on Hegseth's part. And when you look at the controversy over the people recently being fired, by the way, all of whom are people he hired within the past 90 days, it really gives the picture of a Secretary of Defense who's a lightweight, a dilettante. And that's not the kind of person you want as a Secretary of Defense under any circumstances, but particularly not in the challenging environment we find ourselves in today.
Let's talk about some of those top aides who are gone. I think some of whom, were it not for Hegseth or someone like Hegseth being in the position he's in, would not have had the positions they had at the Pentagon. But Senior Advisor Dan Caldwell, Deputy Chief of Staff Darren Selnick, Chief of Staff to the Deputy Secretary of Defense Colin Carroll. What's the effect of departures at a high level like that?
Well, as I say, I think he was responsible for hiring all of them. I mean, I think he had connections with them. He also lost his own chief of staff, who is either being fired or moved somewhere else in the Defense Department. I think what it says to the rest of that very big building and its partners around the world that they're just not serious in the Secretary of Defense's office. They don't have their act together managing a very small group of people. How's somebody like that ever going to lead the entire Pentagon? It's what you get when you don't really care about qualifications for jobs like that, when you're not picking people who are experienced, when your major qualification is personal fealty to Donald Trump. That's what he's got in Hegseth. That's why he's sticking with him. But it's not what you need to do the job.
His chief of staff resigning from his position. We're waiting to see if he lands somewhere else at the Pentagon. But in a Politico op-ed, John Oliot, the former chief Pentagon spokesman who resigned last week, said that his function is now a major distraction and that it's hard to see how Hegseth remains in his role for much longer. Do you think that Hegseth should step down?
Well, by the way, Oliot is the fifth person in his inner circle who's now resigned. I think Hegseth should resign. I don't think he's going to. He may leave at some point because I think he's used up his bank account with Donald Trump. Trump doesn't want to have to waste his resources defending his people, and that's now what he's doing on Hegseth. But I think Trump is bound and determined not to show weakness, which is what he's worried he would do if he fires Hegseth or anybody else. So I think Hegseth has a shelf life of undetermined length, but it's not going to be much longer, would be my guess. 3 months, 4 months, something like that, likely.
You hear the talking point, we just heard it from Hegseth, Leavitt, and Trump himself, which is that they're blaming people who are just upset that he's trying to implement institutional change. What do you think of that argument?
Well, again, these 5 people are all people he brought in and who have said they're in favor of the change that he's trying to make. They just don't think he's qualified to do it. I think it's a very weak response when Hegseth can't even manage and hold together the people he himself is responsible for hiring. It's sort of like the same problem his boss seems to have.
John Bolton, always great to have you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Glad to be with you.
Joining us now, Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. He's the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. What's your response to that defiant display from Secretary Hegseth?
This is a guy that's in so far over his head that he didn't say anything there about denying that he did this gross, sloppy misuse of classified information, sharing now with his family members. We heard about the misuse earlier when this information was shared with other senior members of the administration. It is way past time that Hegseth should either quit or be fired. And I think the question is going to be, well, will my Republican Senate friends, who I know care about our national security, how many more examples of chaos at the Pentagon before they will find their voice and be willing to step up and speak out on the fact that this guy should no longer be Secretary of Defense?
You know the intelligence community, you know intelligence. How serious, Senator, was this breach compared to other cases of highly classified information being mishandled?
Well, let me give you the best example. I was down a couple of weeks ago down in Virginia Beach. I had a big town hall. Many of the people at the town hall knew people that were on the Truman, which is the aircraft carrier that launched these attacks, or the planes that were launched from the aircraft carrier against the Houthis. They knew members on the Truman. They were outraged because they knew if that information had got out, their loved ones could have been, frankly, put in harm's way in an awful, awful way. So this is such an obvious case of sloppiness, carelessness, not respect for classified information. And this is what is happening, I fear, all across the IC, is this group of individuals come in, try to politicize our intelligence, and frankly, in many cases, have put leadership in place that's incompetent.
Is it that serious, you think, Senator, that Hegseth potentially should be charged with some sort of crime for violating top national security secrets?
I'll leave that for lawyers to make that determination. I know on the common sense judgment criteria, if you're putting out attack plans while our planes are in the sky and you're sharing that, not as bad enough that you're sharing it on that chat with the national security advisor and the vice president, but the idea that you are sharing that information with family members who have no basis for having exposure to any of that kind of information, no matter what the secretary says, his comments just don't pass the smell test.
I don't think any of those people on that group chat, that second group chat, had top secret security clearances and were qualified to hear that kind of sensitive information about war plans that were still underway. During President Trump's first term, as you probably remember, he was often quick to remove officials he lost confidence in. But right now, the White House says the president stands firmly behind Secretary Hegseth. What does that say to you?
Well, it says to me that this is a president without any boundaries and without any other adults in the room that say this is, not about the president's feeling at a moment, but it is about the men and women who protect our country in the Defense Department, in the armed services, who I can pretty much assure you don't have much confidence. You saw some of the folks who left this weekend or are fired, saying that there's total chaos at the department. And that creeps through if our men and women in uniform start to lose confidence in their leadership. And I'm afraid that is happening real time.
I think it's significant, Senator, that even Secretary Hegseth's closest advisors are sounding the alarm about his judgment and the turmoil inside the Pentagon right now, and it is severe. How do you think America's adversaries are reading all of this chaos?
Well, it's a great opportunity for China. It's a great opportunity for Russia to continue to push against Ukraine. Since the president in less than 100 days has managed to alienate virtually every ally we have around the world, whether it's through his tariff policies or his kind of pettiness with Canada, threatening to throw them out of the Five Eyes. I worry that what had been our strength, Wolf, for literally decades was that we had friends and allies around the world that could count on us. They already had that trust, I think, undermined. Then you've got the economic travail with the tariffs, and now you've got what appears to be a kind of a Keystone Cops group of leadership over the Defense Department. None of that bodes well for the safety of our country.
So is there evidence that close U.S. allies, NATO allies, are now reluctant to share very sensitive intelligence information with the U.S.?
I am not going to comment on that other than the fact that we'll never fully know because you don't know what's not shared. I do know there have been concerns about how our country is going to treat classified information. I know people, within the intelligence community are aghast, not only at this mistreatment of intelligence, but also think about the random firing of General Hawk at the NSA and Cyber Command. He was extraordinarily well respected. There's still no explanation of that other than the fact that right-wing conspiracy theorist who denied 9/11 and said school shootings are made up, Laura Loomer, came in with this list, and suddenly a General Hawk who's well respected around the world is fired without cause. These are not great signals to send at this challenging time.
Senator Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, thanks as usual for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
All right, I want to talk to you about some news here in Washington. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly used a second Signal group chat to discuss sensitive military plans with members of his family, his lawyer. You called the first leaked Signal chat a, quote, huge mistake. Do you have confidence in Secretary Hegseth's judgment?
Well, the question is this chat prior to the one that was leaked out, or did he continue to use the Signal chat group after that happened? And so I'm not sure the timing of it was. If it was something that he did prior to, okay, he should have learned his lesson now with what happened with the Mike Waltz incident. But if he did it afterwards, yeah, I would have concerns because it's already been burned by it once. I don't think you need to get burned by it twice. I think you should learn from your mistakes.
And I understand your point about the timing, but the principles of the issue don't change in terms of discussing sensitive military details on Signal, particularly with people like his wife, who, as far as I know, doesn't have a security clearance.
Right.
I'm not sure, but I don't believe she does. Does that concern you?
If in fact he did discuss what's called top secret or things that only need to be discussed inside a SCIF with his wife, if she doesn't have that kind of security briefing, yes, it would concern me. And it should be a lesson to everybody in the administration and everybody actually in the federal government. A lot of the federal agencies use Signal because it's supposed to be an encrypted, very secure application. The fact that these things are being leaked now call into question how secure Signal really is.
Right, how secure Signal is, and we know that foreign hackers try to get into the phones of top officials. There's all kinds of concerns from intelligence officials. Congressman Carlos Jimenez, thank you for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.
There is now another scandal involving Signal, the encrypted messaging app, and plans about military strikes. The New York Times first reported that Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, revealed sensitive details about strikes on Yemen on the app, which included that text exchange included his wife and his personal lawyer. Plus, 3 senior aides to Hegseth who were put on leave last week have now been fired. And perhaps the most damning part of all of this is a former aide and close ally took to Politico and wrote a piece decrying that it was, quote, a month from hell inside the Pentagon. Here's what John Olliott, who's a former spokesman now former, of the Pentagon said. From leaks of sensitive operational plans to mass firings, the dysfunction is now a major distraction for the president, who deserves better from his senior leadership, given that it's hard to see Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth remaining in his role for much longer. Now, to be clear, the White House is saying that the president is sticking by the embattled Pentagon chief, and Hegseth went on the offense this morning.
This is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me, because we're changing the Defense Department, putting the Pentagon back in the hands of warfighters, and anonymous smears from disgruntled former employees on old news doesn't matter. This group right here, full of hoaxsters that peddle anonymous sources from leakers with axes to grind.
I have some very smart reporters here at the table with me to discuss this. CNN's Stephen Collinson and Natasha Bertrand, who covers the Pentagon for us. Let's just start where Pete Hegseth ended there, which is the people who were fired, and presumably the people he is talking about, they're not just kind of employees that he inherited when he joined the Pentagon. These are people that he chose, the quote-unquote disgruntled employees, and many of them have been very close friends with him, I'm told, like almost like brothers, for a decade.
This is a really, really important point here because Dan Caldwell, who was one of the employees who was fired last week, he's a senior advisor to Secretary Hegseth. He has known and worked with Hegseth for about a decade now. They date back to the years working together at Concerned Veterans for America, which is a veterans organization. Same with the other individual who was fired that was part of Hegseth's inner circle, Darren Selnick, who was the deputy chief of staff at the Pentagon, also worked with him at Concerned Veterans for America. And so these are people that Hegseth brought on. These are people that he hired and brought into the Defense Department. The same goes with John Olliott, the person who wrote that op-ed last night, that scathing op-ed saying that the last 5 weeks or so at the Pentagon have been absolute chaos. This is really a message that they are trying to send here, in addition to the statement that was released by Dan Caldwell, by Darren Selnick, and by the third official who was fired last week, Colin Carroll, essentially saying that their character and their reputations have been slandered here, and that any notion that they have done something wrong by leaking information to the press, which is one of the rationales that we were given last week when it came out that they were fired, is flat out untrue, something that John Olliott also wrote in his op-ed. And so I think that now we're seeing Hegseth respond in the only way that he knows how to do, which is to attack the media for reporting on something that he actually has not denied the substance of, which was the fact that he had the second Signal chat set up, that his wife, his lawyer, and his brother were in it, and there was no really rational explanation for why they should be read in on a very sensitive military operation.
And I just, so there are so many sort of tentacles to this. One, of course, and perhaps the most important, is what was this document? How sensitive was it? And the people on the text chain, whether they should have had access to it. But then the other is just chaos, dysfunction, whatever John Olliott, who also left on Friday, describes at the highest levels of the Pentagon. I mean, this is Game of Thrones, House of Cards, like, you know, pick your Washington show or some kind of palace intrigue that you would never think would happen in real life is happening real time.
Right, and I think that you've got two dimensions here. You've got the political and the grave national security implications. What you saw there on that clip was the reason that Hegseth got picked in the first place, because he can do the defense, the theatrics. He was there at the Easter egg roll, performing in many ways the way that the president wanted to perform when he picked him, using the classic Trumpian defense. It's the swamp against us, even though, as you were saying, the facts don't support that. On the politics of this, Trump, for now, is standing by him, but as we know in the past, that the president stands by people until he doesn't. I don't think he can let him go, despite the implications of all this, because if he does, he would be admitting a mistake, that he picked someone unsuitable for the Pentagon in the first place. But to your first point, look at the backdrop, the worsening international situation. We've got the peace talks with Ukraine, talks with Iran, the building clash with China over tariffs that threatens to go into something bigger, into a superpower clash. If you have that level of dysfunction at the top of the Pentagon, from someone who perhaps doesn't have the confidence of everyone in the ranks, despite, you know, this conceit that he's the defense secretary for the enlisted man and woman, that is going to be a problem.
And the fact that it was given to the New York Times, you and our colleagues have done great reporting since then, I am told that that is one of the reasons why Trump is with him for now. Because he can look at that and say, oh, just kind of like what we heard from Secretary Hegseth. Oh, it's just, you know, the media out to get him, and it looks like a hit job, and these are people who don't want us to succeed, so on and so forth. The question, to your point, Steve, is how long is that going to last?
Yeah, I think that the question of how much patience the White House is going to have with Secretary Hegseth as things like this continue to come out is a really relevant one here, because it is true that the White House does not necessarily want to go through another confirmation hearing, right? It was very, very messy the first time around. It was very difficult to get Pete Hegseth through. They used a ton of political capital to do that. But at the same time, Hegseth keeps doing these things that make him look very amateurish and that are raising questions not only among people who were in his closest inner circle about his judgment, but also increasingly people in the White House who are saying, why does this keep happening? Why is this the second time that we're seeing this very sensitive classified national security information apparently being put into a Signal messaging group?
Yeah. And then sort of the broader question about the chaos well beyond the Pentagon and how things are going down. I just want to remind people, because it is like drinking from a fire hose, about just some of the other examples that have only happened over the past several days. The president's pick for acting IRS commissioner, he was ousted, I should say, just days after his appointment. The Trump White House apparently are blaming this whole confrontation that they're having with Harvard, which is now escalating because the president is doubling down, on a mistake, that an official mistakenly sent the letter to Harvard in the first place with the threats. And then, of course, the Trump advisors, sort of what's going on behind the scenes, trying to take advantage of Peter Navarro's absence to push for a tariff pause, which was a great story by Josh Dawsey in the Wall Street Journal. Again, these are just examples in the past few days.
Yeah, and at the beginning of the administration, a lot of people were talking about how this was different this time. It was planned. Trump had the people he wanted. He knew what he wanted to do, and that was true to some extent. You know, the early rollout of all those executive orders was far more professional than it was during the start of the first Trump term. But now you're seeing administrations always reflect the person at the top, in my experience, and this is the way Trump has run his business, his life, his first administration, competing forces, and that is naturally going to sort of erode into this kind of chaos. You know, when you're in the middle of an administration, it's often difficult to spot the turning points because the drama is so much. In this administration, the Trump era, that's even harder. But we could look back on some of the things that are going on now, and the president's impulsive, you know, imposition and then taking off of tariffs as it may be a motif for the entire term.
Yeah, and the fact that he is just full speed ahead and they are going to make mistakes when you do that, and they are making mistakes. Thank you so much for your reporting. Appreciate it.
Joining us now is Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. He is the Vice Chair of the Intelligence Committee. Senator, it's always great seeing you. I thank you for your time. Before, Senator, we get into the Hegseth issue, I just want your thoughts, if you would, on Pope Francis, his impact and his legacy.
Well, I think he made the church more inclusive. I think the fact that a pope would speak to issues of social justice, you know, I'm not a Catholic myself, but I thought he made put a human face that brought a lot of young people, not just across North America, but across the world, back into the Catholic Church. And I think he's going to be a hard pope to replace.
And now getting to the other breaking news of the day, President Trump just said he has confidence in Secretary Hegseth. You've opposed Hegseth from day one. You voted against his confirmation. You called on him to resign after the first Signal group chat issue. You're doing so again today. What do you think about these latest revelations?
I think it shows a guy that's way in over his head in a job that's much too big for him. And you saw the little snippet where he fought or pushed back. Well, he didn't deny that he put his family members on this chat. The notion that this is somehow not classified information, the fact that attack plans were being sent out and around before our pilots had actually bombed the Houthis. I would love to take Pete Hegseth down to the Norfolk Naval Station, which is the home port of the aircraft carrier Truman, from which these strikes were launched, and explain to the family and friends of folks on the Truman how this kind of information getting out wouldn't have put their loved ones in harm's way, because he couldn't. And I think it is amazing that he's not been held accountable. I think it's remarkable as well, as you see a number of his senior officials quit. And this is an example, again, of chaos on steroids that are coming out of the DOD. And I just wonder, Jose, when are my Republican senator friends who say they're for national security going to say, this is too much, this is just a bridge too far, and join me and others and say this guy needs to be replaced?
And so, Senator, I'm just wondering, because this would be the second time of confirmation that the Secretary of Defense has utilized this Signal app for communications that included sensitive information, to say the least. For example, do you all in the Senate, in the Intelligence Committee, utilize Signal, the Signal app to communicate any kind of information? And it just seems like it's such a basic question.
Well, Signal, I use Signal. Matter of fact, Signal is safer than traditional cell phone communications, particularly since we know China, through the Salt Typhoon hack, has hacked into our systems. But using Signal, to decide where I'm going to go have dinner with a friend is very different than putting on Signal classified information. And anyone who denies that attack plans before an attack takes place or during an attack taking place, putting out on a non-secure channel, and Signal is not secure. It's better than normal, but it's not fully secure. Saying that's not classified either shows a remarkable ignorance or they're just flat out lying, because anyone at the DOD or in the intelligence community, if they had done this behavior, they would be fired without question.
Senator, how secure or insecure is Signal?
We do know that our adversaries, the Chinas and the Russians of the world, have tried to penetrate Signal. The thing that we also don't have an answer from yet, because if they have been able to penetrate, you can sometimes drop in malware without actually having control of the phone. We don't even have an answer from the first group of folks that included the vice president and the national security advisors and others. Did anybody even screen their phones for malware? Now we've got Hegseth and his family members and a host of others. Is anybody going back and checking these devices? This is basic cyber and Intel 101, and I have zero confidence that any steps have been taken on remediation. And we've got to have. I've got all the Democrats on Senate Intel. We have written repeatedly on this, gotten no response. When are Republicans going to find the courage to actually speak up for our national security, or are they going to allow this constant drift at DOD, which again undermines morale? When you see the top getting off with behavior that nobody else would get away with. And then you've seen these more serious folks get fired recently at DOD. I think this is undermining the confidence that our men and women who protect our country have in this senior leadership. And it's time for this guy to go.
And Senator, meanwhile, we're following breaking news about Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem's bag stolen from a D.C. restaurant, reportedly containing, tons of cash, her ID, including passport and DHS access badge. Just wondering, don't officials have Secret Service protection? I mean, what do you think when you hear this?
Well, again, I don't know the particulars on this incident, but if you're a cabinet member, you have security. And I can tell you when I was governor, I had security. If I'd left something behind, my guys would make sure it got corrected. But in my mind, this reflects a pattern of sloppiness, of carelessness, of not treating, the information and materials that you receive from in these roles in the government positions in an appropriate manner. And I think it permeates the whole senior level of this administration, where they think they're above the law, they're above any of the normal rules that are made for everyone else, and this will come back and bite us.
Yeah, I mean, and if it was just a run-of-the-mill purse snatching in a restaurant somewhere, I mean, how could something like this happen to whatever else it could have been? Senator, it's always a pleasure to see you. I thank you very much for your time.
Why is Elon Musk pushing Signal? It's because of WhatsApp privacy policy changes. Let's get some context first. WhatsApp is super popular. It has around 2 billion users worldwide. One of its hooks is that WhatsApp says it cannot view the content of the messages you're sending thanks to encryption. However, other data can be collected. So, when the service announced an updated privacy policy would go into effect on February 8th, people were concerned. The following language got people's attention. Quote, as part of the Facebook family of companies, WhatsApp receives information from and shares information with this family of companies. We may use the information we receive from them, and they may use the information we share with them to help our services and their offerings. So this language sounds like what you write in WhatsApp would be shared with Facebook, and Facebook is not known exactly for respecting privacy. Hence, the freakout began. Keep in mind, WhatsApp has been sharing data with Facebook since 2016. WhatsApp has also made a number of statements saying that the new policy will not affect the privacy of messages with friends and family. It relates to messaging businesses through the platform. Also, the policy changes will not take effect until May 15th. However, between the announcement of a new policy and WhatsApp statements, Elon Musk tweets out, use Signal. Then the tweet was retweeted by Jack Dorsey, who happens to be the CEO of Twitter. So guess what? People started downloading Signal in droves. So what is Signal? It works like your standard text messaging app. However, its big draw is privacy. On Signal's website, you see testimonials from Jack Dorsey as well as Edward Snowden. When I see that Edward Snowden uses Signal, that gives me a pretty good idea that Signal must be pretty secure. People can use Signal to send text, video, audio, and picture messages. All of those are protected by end-to-end encryption. That means that only the sender and recipient can read messages in Signal. If messages are intercepted by a nosy neighbor, a mobile carrier, or law enforcement, they get to look at gibberish. Signal does not collect or store user data other than your phone number. On top of that, Signal has no ads. Signal's site proudly states that, quote, privacy isn't an optional mode, it's just the way that Signal works. Signal tweeted and explained that it was handling quite the surge. Musk's tweet was published on January 7th. On the 11th, Signal was downloaded almost 1.3 million times just on that day, according to a tracking firm. A Signal spokesperson said that the number of downloads reported is on the low side. On the 13th of January, Signal posted a couple of screenshots from the Google Play Store. Signal went from over 10 million installs to over 50 million. If for whatever reason you're not feeling up to Signal, there's always Telegram, which is also seeing a surge of new installs with now over 500 million active users. Just know Telegram is not as private as Signal. Telegram grabs your name, phone number, contacts, IP address, and user ID. Again, Signal just grabs your phone number. If you want your messages encrypted, you'll have to opt in. Also, group messages are not encrypted. Additionally, Telegram's encryption scheme does not seem entirely open source, according to some researchers. That means it is not fully clear what happens to your messages when they get to Telegram's servers. All that being said, Telegram seems very confident that others cannot hack Telegram messages. In an FAQ, a question asks, what if my hacker friend says they could decipher Telegram messages? The answer reads, anyone who claims that Telegram messages can be deciphered is welcome to prove that claim in our competition and win $300,000. So there you go. That's why Elon Musk was pushing Signal. Musk is also not a Facebook champion by any means. He publicly tweeted hashtag delete Facebook, it's lame. And then there was this. Musk shared a meme that linked Facebook to the riots that took place at the US Capitol. Oh, and that initial use Signal tweet by Musk seemed to have an impact on a biotech company called Signal Advance. Signal Advance has nothing to do with the Signal app, so the app maker tweeted, "This isn't us." Tweets can be powerful, people. Looking for a phone to use with Signal? Check this out. I'm Mayez Akhtar, and I'll see you online.
Joining us now is security expert Chris Pearson, founder and CEO of Black Cloak. Chris, thanks for being here. Signal is an encrypted app. It's like WhatsApp, but probably stronger. It means it's scrambling the information from end to end. The government did tell Americans to use this when China was able to get into our phone systems. So why is it not secure enough for our government officials to be having sensitive, top secret, classified conversations?
Well, there are a few issues here, Katie. First of all is going to be in terms of just normal text messages. A text message that you send between yourself and your parents, your brothers, your friends, that is pretty much akin to sending a postcard, writing the information on a postcard that everyone can see in the mail. Not going to be secure. If you have to transmit that information to a family member, social security number, other information there, and you want to use encrypted communication, Signal is going to be an application of choice, but it is a consumer-based application. The real issue here is that for sensitive or classified information that is being used by and transmitted by the government, that number one, the devices must be protected, and number two, the application and the transmission of the data must be protected. Just simply using an encrypted app that is only consumer grade on a personal device is actually going to open up the United States and others, right, to foreign spying, hacking, and other risks. It is not insufficient to go ahead and protect classified or even sensitive communications.
How would they go about doing that? If you are a foreign adversary or a bad actor, and maybe you're not even attached to a government, and you want to get into Marco Rubio's phone or you want to get into Pete Hegseth's personal phone to see what's on some of these apps, how do they do that?
I mean, the number one thing that people are going to do is go ahead and do open source intelligence. So they're going to find the numbers that are associated with the individuals. Much of this information exists on data broker websites or is on the dark web, which of course cyber criminals are on, as well as nation states. Once you have that information, you can go ahead and try to send a smishing, a fake test message, or a phishing message to their known email address. And if they open up that email on their phone, if they open up that email through the text messages on their phone, they could launch malware on the phone that then gives access into the entire device itself. If you're talking about a sophisticated nation state, then what you've heard of many, many times and reported on is Pegasus, right? Nation state spyware that actually does not require the user to do anything, but can be sent to your phone and gives a nation state total control of that device, which would include apps that are on the device and the different messages that are on it. In this case, Signal and the unencrypted messages that are resident on the phone.
Is there any way for a bad actor to place somebody's phone number into a group chat? They keep talking about how they have their best guys working on trying to figure out how Jeffrey Goldberg got onto this group text message chain. Could somebody place him on?
It seems that is going to be less likely. You've done this. I've done this. Everyone has done this. We've sent the wrong text message to somebody. We've added somebody to an email chain by mistake because their name starts with the same name or same initials. We've all done this before. This is why you separate the devices, right? You do not have your work device that is associated with the government be combined with your personal device associated with you individually, so you don't have cross-contamination. On Signal, you can actually have a setting so it does not pull from your contacts. And so you have to individually and uniquely add an individual to that text message, to that chat, which gives you an upper level of security. That probably was not done in this case. And this is probably more of a fat fingering of that contact being added in.
Fat fingering. I'm thinking of Homer Simpson mashing his palm against the phone in The Simpsons. One other question for you about sensitivity and the ability of foreign governments to get into these phones. Steve Witkoff was in Russia when he was on this text chain. Tulsi Gabbard was overseas as well. She's not saying specifically where she was. She says she can't remember. If the Russians wanted to find out what Steve Witkoff had on his phone, could they?
The answer simply is yes. So when your phone connects into the different communication towers that are controlled by foreign agents, foreign adversaries, intelligence agencies, they can listen to, watch, hear what is actually going on in terms of voice communications, and the same in terms of text communications. Now, with regard to Signal that is encrypted end to end, but you could launch a successful network attack against a specific device and try to take over that device, which would render the actual encryption useless. Now, we absolutely know from Salt Typhoon, which was launched by China, where it impacted 8 major telecommunication companies just 4 months ago, that those nation states, especially China, are targeting telecommunications in specific individuals, specific numbers, and specific text messages because that is all part of their plan. The fact of the matter is, if you are a high-profile person, a high-profile government individual, that you should stick to approved devices and approved communication mediums.
Chris Pearson, thank you very much for joining us.
Multiple sources tell CNN Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth revealed attack plans for airstrikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen in another signal chat. This one included his wife, brother, and personal attorney. Now, this second signal chat is in addition to the one Hegseth used to communicate about military plans with cabinet officials last month that is now under investigation by the Defense Department's acting inspector general. I want to go straight to CNN's Kevin Liptak, who is at the White House for more on this. Kevin, what are we learning about this?
Yeah, and if this all sounds sort of reminiscent of that scandal that engulfed the administration about a month ago, it should, because the Secretary of Defense, we are now learning, shared very similar details about the U.S. attack plans on the Houthi rebels in Yemen on a second signal group. And we understand that this included things like takeoff times for some of those fighter jets as they were preparing to strike those targets in Yemen. The big difference here is who comprised each of these signal groups, because remember that first time around, that group was created by the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. It was intended to coordinate this attack with members of the cabinet officials who were in top national security positions in the administration, and he inadvertently included the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg. This new signal group that we are just learning about this evening included some members of Pete Hegseth's inner circle who are, it's not clear what reason they would have to have this information about the strikes that the U.S. was planning to carry out. It included his brother and his personal attorney. They both work at the Pentagon. It's not clear whether they have security clearances. It also included his wife, Jennifer, who has accompanied him previously in meetings with other foreign officials, which has raised some eyebrows among certain officials at the Pentagon. Now, as you mentioned, that original signal sort of snafu is now being investigated by the Inspector General at the Pentagon. It's not clear whether this latest revelation will be included in the review. The Pentagon officially has not commented on these latest revelations, which I should note were first reported by the New York Times. But this does punctuate a period of chaos inside the Pentagon and inside the inner circle of Pete Hegseth. You'll remember just last week, senior officials who were in sort of his front office at the Pentagon were fired essentially for what officials described as a leak investigation. And this is all sort of drawing questions, including from some loyalists, some allies of Pete Hegseth, at how this chaos has been allowed to perpetuate. We just heard from John Ulyat, who until recently was Pete Hegseth's press secretary at the Pentagon. He says that it's been a month of total chaos at the Pentagon, from leaks of sensitive operational plans to mass firings. The dysfunction is now a major distraction for the president, who deserves better from his senior leadership. Ulyat goes on to say even strong backers of the secretary, like me, must admit the last month has been a full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon, and it's becoming a real problem for the administration. Part of the problem, of course, is that this is not sort of a quiet period for national security. You have Pete Hegseth making sort of preparations on the president's command, these designs on the Panama Canal. He was just there visiting earlier this month. You also have this buildup of U.S. assets in the Middle East in preparation for a potential Israeli strike on Iran. You also have tensions in Asia. So this is a fraught period for the Pentagon to be undergoing, this period of chaos. And certainly, I think now you'll hear from officials who are questioning whether Pete Hegseth is sort of the man for the job at this very fraught moment. I should also note that when those original war plans, attack plans were shared in the signal group, the administration and the White House and President Trump denied that there was anything classified contained in that information. Of course, that drew a lot of skepticism from almost every national security analyst that we talked to, Jessica.
Yeah. All right, Kevin Liptak with the breaking news there at the White House. Thank you so much. And joining us now to talk more about this, CNN senior military analyst and retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Also with us, former Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh. Sabrina, I want to start first with you. Let's zoom out for a second. I want to get your thoughts just as you're hearing all of this information, this idea that there was a second signal chat where he was sharing this information about these strikes with people like his wife, his brother, his personal attorney, who don't have security clearances. What are you thinking as someone who stood at that podium at the Pentagon and knows how this information is typically handled?
I mean, it's truly shocking. I think when I saw this reporting coming out from the New York Times at first, there was no question there were going to be more signal threads. Who started them? This one in particular was started by Pete Hegseth. And for him to add, his wife, his brother, his personal attorney, people that don't need access or need to know about classified information about operations involving the Houthis in any way. I mean, this is something that we would never do under the previous administration. And on top of that, putting these classified details into a commercial texting app like Signal, again, that puts our fighter pilots at risk. That was something that, certainly concerned me deeply when these texts were first exposed just a month ago. It's that same concern. It's putting the operation, those fighter pilots who are in the air about to conduct this operation at risk with people that don't need to know this information.
And Cedric, I want to go off what Sabrina's saying there from the military perspective. Again, just the potential for danger for our men and women in uniform. What kind of potential for danger is there if this information were to get leaked or get into the wrong hands? Again, this is an encrypted app, but it is not a secure line. And in fact, his advisors had warned him that it wasn't a secure place to be sharing information like this.
Yeah, that's right, Jessica. And Sabrina's exactly right. First of all, we look at the fighter pilots and all of the effort that goes into planning air operations of this type. People don't realize, if you're not involved in air operations, a lot of people don't understand that these are very complex operations, and there's a lot that can go wrong as you plan them. And one of the key things is when you actually plan these operations and you have specific things like time over target, the type of ordnance that's going to be dropped, the type of targets that you're going after, the exact target that you're going after, all of those kinds of things are absolutely essential elements of information. And those essential elements of information are exactly what makes these kinds of texts classified. And no matter what they will spin at this Pentagon, this stuff is classified, no doubt about it. And Jessica, this is the kind of thing that gets people in trouble. When the first Signal chat scandal broke, we talked about the old World War II adage, loose lips sink ships. This is exactly the kind of thing that happens because Signal chats can be intercepted by sophisticated adversaries like the Russians, like the Chinese. It's difficult for them to do so, but they've proven that they can do it in Ukraine. And it's the kind of thing that we have to guard against. And, these types of Signal chats, even if they happen in the United States, in the DC area, you can bet that the Russians and the Chinese are working very hard to intercept them.
And we know that the Chinese government has been trying to hack into a number of elected officials' phones, including, all the way up to the vice president and others. Sabrina, I want to go to the statement that we obtained, that CNN obtained from John Oliot, who was most recently Hegseth's press secretary, again, a role you're quite familiar with. And our colleagues, Natasha Bertrand, Jake Tapper, Haley Thomas, and Zachary Cohen, write in this piece that he said in the statement, Chairman, it's been a month of total chaos at the Pentagon, from leaks of sensitive operational plans to mass firings. The dysfunction is now a major distraction for the president, who deserves better from his senior leadership. For his former press secretary, again, just recently former, to be saying that and to be quoted saying that, what do you make of that?
I mean, I have to agree, he's not wrong. We're nearly 100 days into this presidency, and it does seem that America and our military is less safe. I mean, from the signal threads that have been now exposed to what you're seeing, Secretary Hegseth say about our allies and partners, to turning our back on Ukraine, to being willing to engage and get closer with countries like Russia and kind of, succumb to what Putin wants. Yeah, these last few months have been absolute chaos. And I think it really shows the incompetence of what we have, in Secretary Hegseth sitting at the top. We don't have qualified leadership. And this was something that, we were sort of sounding the alarm bells on when he was confirmed. And so you obviously want the best, but, he's fired all of his senior, members around him. And so you're seeing the chaos kind of unfold, not just in the text threads, but being played out on the world stage. And that, of course, is so dangerous, not just in sending members to our allies, but really sending a message to our adversaries as well.
It's difficult to predict what future that might be, except I don't know a lot of people who love the idea of living under a despot. I don't think people generally choose to live in a democracy over a dictatorship.
A lot of people are communicating over the internet on their phone now, not just SMS. Messages like Signal, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, they all have some kind of end-to-end encryption these days. So this is not the same as when you go online to, let's say, an online shop, and you immediately have a conversation and set up an encrypted connection. This is much slower than that and much more asynchronous. So there's a lot of difficulties when using instant messaging or, application-based messaging, because we don't know really what's going on between the two parties, right? So I send you a message, theoretically some trustworthy server takes that message and forwards it onto your phone, right? Theoretically, right? How much do we trust the server? I suppose it depends on the app. But in any case, maybe we want to try and use a protocol that means even if we don't trust the server, there's not a lot the server can do, right? And that's what the Signal protocol uses, and by association, WhatsApp and Facebook Instant Messenger and things like this. I'll put my phone down and we'll talk about Alice and Bob again, because we always talk about Alice and Bob, right? So they want to have a conversation via a server between themselves, right? Now, the problem is that maybe Bob installed the application. So he installed Signal or WhatsApp or something like this 6 months ago, and he's just waiting patiently for some friend to turn up and install the app as well. Right? I get lots of invites to install various different chat apps. Most of them I turn down because I don't want that many icons on my phone. So what will happen is Bob will start by installing the app, and completely aside from whoever he wants to talk to later, he's going to send a few things to the server. He's going to send a public key that's his identity. So that's his identity public key for Bob. This is going to be a public key on an elliptic curve, like lots of the ones we've talked about. And it'll have a private component or a private key associated with it that will be kept to himself. He's also going to sign a public key to verify that he's in control of this private key. Right? That's kind of standard in cryptography. And then he's going to produce a list of one-time pre-keys. Remember that what he wants to do is have key exchange conversations between Alice or Charlie or anyone else that comes along, and he wants to do that not knowing when they're going to come along. So he's going to send his parts of the messages ahead of time to the server. Produce a list of one-time pre-keys. Remember that what he wants to do is have key exchange conversations between Alice or Charlie or anyone else that comes along, and he wants to do that not knowing when they're going to come along. So he's going to send his parts of the messages ahead of time to the server. So he's going to have, you know, a one-use public key here, and another one, and another one, and he's going to number these or something like this. So this is 1, 2, 3, and number 4. So these are all public keys, of which he has the private keys stashed on his phone, right, or on his application. Now, the server's going to do this for anyone that installs the application, right? This will happen between your Signal app and their servers, or your WhatsApp and their servers, and so on. What will happen next is sometime down the line, hopefully Bob's made some friends and they've agreed to talk to him on their phones. So Alice comes along and she wants to set up a communication with Bob. Now, the exact same problems that Bob faced, she faces, right? The first one is that Bob might have his phone switched off, so she can't start up a conversation, right? And she also doesn't know where Bob is, so the server does. Right? The server, based on Bob's mobile phone number or IP address or something, will know how to get in contact with him. So she goes to the server and says, I'd like to talk to Bob, can I have a pre-key bundle? Right? And this is a set of parameters from Bob that she can use to form a communication. So the server's going to send to Alice Bob's identity key, Bob's signed pre-key, and one, either at random or sequentially, of these, let's say number 3, right, of these one-use keys. Alice is going to be sent 3 different public keys from Bob. Right, Alice is going to generate an identity key of her own for Alice, and she's going to generate an ephemeral key, which is like a one-use session key, which is very common in Diffie-Hellman, for herself there. Right? What are all these going to do? Well, let's get rid of this paper, or just move. Or I'll swap it around, shall I? We've got I seem to have changed pens, but let's not worry about that. We've got Bob's identity key. That should identify him. Right? If we know that Bob has the private key, and we know that's Bob, the fact that this key has been used means it must be Bob on the other end of the line. Right? That's a really good thing to know. His signed pre-key for Bob. This stops the server messing about with his pre-keys because he signed it, and the server can't do that. And a one-use public key for Bob. And what that's going to do is make sure that no one can replay attack Bob by sending this whole conversation again later. Bob is going to delete this when he's seen it for the first time. So when you fetch a pre-key bundle and you use it to talk to someone on one of these apps, they will delete that pre-key so that they can never use it again. And we've got Alice. We've got the identity key from Alice and her ephemeral key. Now, I'm going to use a different pen. We've got 5 different public keys here, right? And we're going to perform 4 Diffie-Hellmans, right? Which is getting a little bit hairy, but you know, bear with me. To remind you, we did a video on Diffie-Hellman, which you might like to watch. But what Diffie-Hellman does is you both send public keys to each other, you exchange them, you use your secrets to calculate a shared secret. So any of these 2 public keys can be combined to create a shared secret. Right? But if you only use 2 of them, you're not getting the whole picture, and you're not, you know, for example, if you only use Bob's identity key and Alice's ephemeral key, you aren't guaranteeing the identity of Alice by verifying this particular identity key here. Every public version has a private one. So there's going to be a little private identity key for Alice, and a little private ephemeral key for Alice, and they get used within the mathematics. And the same on the other side. So there's a little one for Bob, so this is identity key for Bob. Right, I've drawn out too many. And this one is let's say, this was number 3, wasn't it? So let's put in number 3 here. Bob's got a whole list of these, right? So he's got a whole list of these, 1, 2, 3, and this is the one he's going to use. Alice is going to perform a Diffie-Hellman key exchange 4 times, right? So she's going to do this one here, she's going to do this one here, she's going to do this one here, that's number 3, and she's going to do this one here, number 4, right? So she's bringing all the keys into play. Then she's going to produce one master key, shall we say, with all of these pre-master secrets. So she's going to take 1, she's going to append it to 2, she's going to append it to 3, append it to 4. She's going to put that through something called a key derivation function, which, for the sake of simplicity, we'll just say is very similar to a hash function. And that's going to produce her master secret. She can then use that to encrypt things, and theoretically, when she sends a message to Bob, Bob will be able to do the same thing, and no one else will. Right? So she'll send a message including something encrypted, her identity key and her ephemeral key. Bob will do the exact same procedure, and then he will be able to send her a message back. The way that this signal protocol works with Alice and Bob and the server in between is called triple Diffie-Hellman. Why are we doing all these different Diffie-Hellmans, right? In our previous video, we just had a public key for Alice and a public key for Bob. We seem to be wasting a lot of time. Well, each of these different Diffie-Hellman exchanges gives us something different. But the really important ones that I want to talk about are the ones involving these identity keys here. The identity keys prove who you are. But of course, if I'm Alice and you're Bob and I send you an identity key for myself, it doesn't prove who I am at all. It's just a number. It doesn't say anything, right? So how do you actually know that the message came from me? Right? And the answer is that actually what you need to do is look at this number offline, out of band. You need to go outside of the normal line of communication over the internet and face-to-face look at this number. And if you see that it's right, then you know that it must have been me having this conversation. Okay, so I can send you a message using Signal, right? You've installed Signal. You're Bob, I'm Alice in this case, right? So you've already sent your pre-keys to the server, just waiting to go. My phone will send a message to the server and say, can I get a pre-key bundle? And then we'll perform an exchange, right? Something like that. So I'm going to send you a message. It's not going to be interesting. Hello. Right, so I send you a message. Hopefully it pops up on your phone. It does. There we go. I mean, this is good evidence that it was me, right? I literally sent a message and it appeared on your phone. But that doesn't always happen in instant messaging. So sometimes I'm not around or you're not around at the time. So how did you know when it pops up my name on here, but it is me? And the answer is you don't, right? Someone could have, the server or someone else could have intercepted these messages and performed a man-in-the-middle attack, right? The only way we can verify it is to check out each other's public keys, right? Our identity keys. So the way that Signal does this is it takes the identity public key of Alice and the identity public key of Bob, and it combines them using a hash function into a safety number, right? That safety number is essentially a summary of our two public identity keys, right? If we have the same safety number, that means we're having a conversation with the same two identity keys, which means it must be a conversation just between us two. That's the idea. So let's have a look. I'm going to go into my safety number, and they're the same. And in Signal, actually, you can press this little verified button which says we've looked at these out of band. This is called an out of band communication because we're not using the normal encryption to verify our keys. Right? So now, actually, when we send messages, it will show as verified. So in WhatsApp, it's not called a safety number, it's just called a security code. But you can see it is absolutely the same. Now, of course, most people don't do this, right? Most people send messages and assume there isn't a man in the middle. And in all likelihood, there probably isn't. Right? But if you want to be really sure, maybe have a look at your safety number. We've only covered half the story. Right? We've talked about this pre-key bundles and this initial triple Diffie-Hellman. I mean, we all have phones. We talk about batteries all the time. So if you hypothetically picked 4 words that were in the top 500.
Well, those calls for resignation are certainly growing tonight as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth finds himself in another incident concerning national security. ABC News has confirmed that Hegseth shared details about an imminent attack in Yemen back in March in a second Signal group chat. 2 sources familiar with the contents of that chat say his wife, his brother, and his personal attorney were in the group chat. Now, his wife does not work for the Defense Department, while his brother and personal lawyer do have roles within the department and the Pentagon, according to officials. So those details shared in the second chat included the flight schedules for the FA-18 Hornets involved in the pending attack on Houthi positions. The sharing of the details reportedly happened around the same time in mid-March when Hegseth and other key members of President Donald Trump's National Security Council inadvertently shared details about the March 15th missile strike in Yemen with the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Officials also confirmed that this second chat with family members was created by Hegseth on his personal phone. We're now hearing from several members of Congress calling for his resignation. U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth releasing a statement saying, how many times does Pete Hegseth need to leak classified intelligence before Donald Trump and Republicans understand that he isn't only an expletive liar, he is a threat to our national security? The Illinois Democrat went on to say, every day he stays in his job is another day our troops' lives are endangered by his singular stupidity. He must resign in disgrace. Now, in a statement, U.S. Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy says, once again, Secretary Hegseth has endangered American service members by improperly sharing operational information through insecure channels. This latest report, disclosing real-time military strike details to his family members, takes it to a new and deeply troubling level. He adds, the ongoing investigations related to his conduct must be protected, and he must resign immediately. Now, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says in a post on X, the details keep coming out. We keep learning how Pete Hegseth put lives at risk, but Trump is still too weak to fire him. Pete Hegseth must be fired. We spoke to ABC7 political analyst Laura Washington, who says this latest incident will make it difficult for Hegseth to keep his job.
It raises serious questions why he's still there. Security is the most important thing in defense, and obviously there was a lot of a lack of understanding about the importance of security in this case.
Within the last hour, the assistant to the Secretary of Defense posted a statement on X denying that any classified information was shared in any Signal chat. It reads in part, "Another day, another old story, back from the dead." They relied only on the words of people who were fired this week and appear to have a motive to sabotage the secretary and the president's agenda. Now, there have been at least 3 officials within the Defense Department fired since that first Signal chat was leaked. ABC News has reached out to the Pentagon for comment, but has not received a response.
Let's get more now from NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Cubie, and retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, former commander of U.S. Army Europe. Courtney, you helped break this story. Walk us through the sequence of events and what we now know.
Yeah, so one of the big questions that we've had ever since the very first Signal chat was exposed by The Atlantic several weeks ago was exactly whether this information was classified. Look, people like, I don't want to put words in General Hertling's mouth, but somebody who has been at the tip of the spear during missions and operations can tell you that specific information about an imminent operation, especially one that has already been ordered to go, would be considered classified, and oftentimes at some of the highest levels of classification in the United States military. And obviously that's to keep the men and women who were involved in that operation safe and protect the sanctity of the mission itself. Well, what we have now learned is that, in fact, the information that was provided by Secretary Hegseth in that Signal chat was provided directly from the commander of U.S. Central Command, General Eric Kurilla. And in fact, he sent that information on a classified system to Secretary Hegseth. And Anna, what we learned, according to these officials who we spoke with, was, in fact, Secretary Hegseth forwarded on that information on his personal phone on an unclassified Signal app, a messaging app that many people use, frankly, but again, unclassified. Literally within minutes of getting that information, he sent that on the Signal app, not only to the Signal chat that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz had started, but also on one that the Secretary himself had started that, as we have now learned, included his wife, his brother, his personal attorney, and a number of his top aides. Again, the information was provided to Secretary Hegseth on a classified server, and he passed some of it on word for word on the Signal app, Anna.
Gabe, we just heard Hegseth's defense, but what's the White House saying about these new details?
Hi there, Anna. Well, the White House hasn't responded specifically to these new details that just came out this morning in Courtney's reporting. However, what we have been hearing from the White House repeatedly is that they think this is a non-story. They keep calling it an old story, old news, and a hoax, as the White House officials have described it. And President Trump did so yesterday. Now, this all comes on as the White House really tries to move on from this controversy. The White House officials I've spoken with insist that the president remains that he's still standing by his Secretary of Defense. He said so as much publicly, and right now we have no indication he's backing off of any of that. Now, during his interview this morning, Secretary Hegseth once again seemed to be playing to an audience of one. He referred to the president as, quote, superhuman, basically comparing what he's going through now to some of the attacks that he feels that the president has undergone as well. So far from the White House, this does not appear to be shaking their confidence in the Secretary of Defense, despite all this controversy and despite one member of the Republican Party, Don Bacon of Nebraska, coming out and really questioning Hegseth's leadership on it.
Courtney, what about the rank and file? Because you have these new details kind of reigniting this Signal controversy. There have been recent leaks, new firings. Is there a sense of dysfunction behind the scenes at the Pentagon right now?
Yeah, another one of the talking points we keep hearing from Secretary Hegseth and many around him, and even frankly as high up as the president, is that morale remains high in the military. The reality is, Anna, I've not seen any actual metrics or stats that prove that to be the case. About once or twice every year or so, the military will do these surveys where they'll talk about things like morale, but candidly, if there's one that's existed that specifically is talking about this issue and that's testing the morale in the military, it's not something that's been made public. One of the things that I keep hearing after the first Signal chat, but really specifically after this most recent one, which again, Secretary Hegseth created this Signal himself, and he is the one who added the people to it. Our people are asking about two things. Number one is accountability. The Secretary and many people around him have made it very clear that they intend to restore accountability to the military. And one of the issues that they frequently bring up is the withdrawal from Afghanistan. But another is leadership. People in the Pentagon, many in the rank and file, and who I speak with, are asking about whether this is a real show of leadership here, that the Secretary of Defense, look, he's not denying what has happened here, whether this shows the behavior of a leader by not taking accountability for his actions, Anna.
Courtney Kube, Gabe Gutierrez, keep digging, guys. Thank you so much. So, General Hertling, if details about a strike that you just sent over a secure system were then blasted out on someone's personal phone, what would you expect to happen? What would be your immediate concerns?
Well, I would look for an investigation immediately, Anna, and that's something that I think both the Pentagon and the National Security Council has pushed back on. They say they're going to do an investigation, and that Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, was going to be the one that really focused on it. I haven't seen that yet. And there continues to be, as Courtney just said, continued refutes of whatever happened. And no, we didn't do anything. We didn't have any classified information. Anna, I'm telling you, looking at what was on the device, that was sensitive information that affected targeting and a process by the U.S. military. And, you know, the news that came out this morning of it being transferred from what's called a SIPR computer, more than likely, Secret Internet Protocol Router. It's a type of computer that every single person that has any kind of access to classified information has on their desk, along with a regular computer that has unclassified stuff on it. On those SIPR computers, there are no access panels. So in other words, you can't put a stick into it or you can't copy it onto another computer. It's impossible to get into that computer. So when you're transferring that kind of information, I can conceive of how it was done. Whoever transferred it picked up their cell phone, went to the Signal app, looked at their screen on the SIPRnet, and then used just the voice data on the Signals app and basically say what was on that SIPR message, the secret classified message. Does it have a classified stamp on it? Confidential, secret, top secret? No, it does not. When it's on the net, it certainly does because it's part of a secret system. But when it goes on the Signals app, just the transfer by voice or taking a photo and pasting it on SIPR or on the Signals app would really condemn whoever does it of passing classified information. The other thing that I'd say is there's all the commentary about who it was passed to and whether it was classified or not. I'm going to go back to one important point. It was Signals. It was an unclassified system that you're passing this information on, and everyone in the Pentagon has been told, don't use Signals app. It's unclassified, and it can be hacked. And anyone that knows the use of computer when they go overseas or when they're communicating knows that there are systems within different governments, the Russian, the Chinese, the Iranians, that can certainly hack into these systems.
And we have been told that the Secretary of Defense was warned about sharing any sensitive information over unclassified systems. You talk about this computer that is used to pass secure information. Clearly, there are ways to pass information along in real time without having to rely on a Signal app. Congressman Don Bacon, we heard Gabe mention, retired Air Force general. He's now the first Republican to break ranks on all this. He called it unacceptable. He says Hegseth is, quote, acting like he's above the law and that it shows an amateur person. Are you surprised more veterans in Congress, especially on the GOP side, haven't condemned this?
Well, I know Representative Bacon. He was a brigadier general in Iraq when I was there commanding a division. So he knows what's going on, and in Iraq, we not only had the SIPRNet and the NIPRNet, the non-classified, but we also had a NATO secret rack. So you have 3 computers on your desk. Don Bacon was one of the planners in Baghdad that would see this stuff on a daily basis. And he knows more than most what would happen to anyone who leaked this kind of information. And coming from the phone of Secretary Hegseth, that was a leak. And it's interesting that he's condemning all the leakers within his administration or within the Defense Department, but he's not having that reflect back on himself. The word I'd use, Anna, it's my favorite word. It's called sophomoric. It comes from the Latin sophomore, wise, and moros, idiot. So you know enough to understand, you know enough to comprehend what's happening, but you really don't understand the implications of it. And that seems to be what Secretary Hegseth is doing right now.
And the Wall Street Journal editorial board said something similar, calling it a mess at the Pentagon, writing the staff infighting, dismissals, leaks over Signal app chats look to be the self-inflicted mistakes of a management neophyte. You think these are rookie mistakes that Secretary Hegseth maybe could grow into the job after all this?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. If he is kept on board, he has to grow into these things. The Defense Department is huge. There's a lot for him to learn. He just needs to open his ears and his eyes to learn it. But here's the one piece I'd also suggest. If General Eric Kurilla passed this to him on a SIPR computer, and then he put it on a Signals app, I got to tell you, if I'm General Kurilla in the field, I'm going to be very careful what I pass my boss, because I don't trust him anymore to keep these kind of secrets until he shows that kind of trust. That's the kind of thing that Courtney was talking about in terms of the morale in the Pentagon. They don't know who to trust anymore.
Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, good to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Back here in the States, the White House continues to stand by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth amid his second Signal group chat controversy. NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake has the latest.
This morning, amid growing calls for the defense secretary to resign, President Trump is defending Pete Hegseth.
Do you remain confident in Pete Hegseth?
Oh, total.
President Trump.
Why do you even ask a question like that? The spirit in the armed forces is fantastic. No, great confidence.
Dismissing Hegseth's sharing of sensitive military information in a second group chat ahead of U.S. strikes in Yemen. Hegseth appearing with his family at the White House Easter egg roll.
I have spoken to the president, and we are going to continue fighting on the same page all the way.
Overnight, a prominent Republican lawmaker joining calls from top Democrats for Hegseth's resignation. Nebraska Congressman Don Bacon telling Politico, quote, "I find it unacceptable and I wouldn't tolerate it if I was in charge." Adding, foreign powers like Russia and China are likely to be monitoring the Secretary of Defense's phone and, quote, "He's acting like he's above the law, and that shows an amateur person." NBC News has confirmed Hegseth shared sensitive information about U.S. military operations in Yemen last month on his personal phone in a Signal group chat with 13 people, including his wife, as well as his brother and his personal lawyer, who both hold jobs at the Pentagon. That's according to 2 sources with knowledge of the matter. The sources adding an aide had warned Hegseth not to share sensitive information on an unsecure communication system before the operation. The New York Times, which first broke the story, reports Hegseth shared flight schedules for U.S. military jets targeting Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. One source confirmed that to NBC News. Hegseth deflecting questions about that reporting, instead attacking what he called disgruntled former employees at the Pentagon, appearing to refer to 3 top aides he fired last week.
You know, what a big surprise that a few leakers get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out.
Okay, NBC's Garrett Haake with that report. And last hour, we heard again from the defense secretary. Here's some of what he said in an appearance on Fox News.
What was shared over Signal, then and now, however you characterize it, was informal, unclassified coordinations for media coordination and other things. That's what I've said from the beginning.
At the beginning, it was left-wing reporters from The Atlantic who got a hold of it and then wanted to create a problem for the president. This is what it's all about, trying to get at President Trump and his agenda.
All right, a couple things that are not true there. The reporter from The Atlantic, the editor at Jeffrey Goldberg, did not get his hands on it. He was included in the group chat, and it was Pete Hegseth who then put the attack plans on that group chat. And this group chat on Signal, on an iPhone, was actually started by Pete Hegseth after the massive scandal of the first Signal group chat that he was part of.
Concurrently. And, you know, Willie, it's kind of funny to hear him talking about, like, left wing, right? It's like left wing. No, it's Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal editorial page. It's the National Review. It's conservative generals and admirals. It's really anybody that's ever served in the military that understands in combat, as Pete Hegseth understands himself. I mean, he went on missions. I'm sure he would have been really angry if, when he was before he went out on missions, you know, the Secretary of Defense was saying, Pete Hegseth's unit's about to move here. Or it's just, again, this is not even close. And so when you say left wing this, left wing that, that's kind of like on immigration saying, oh, it's just a bunch of left wingers that want to help gang members, when again, you've got the Wall Street Journal editorial page, the National Review editorial page, Joe Rogan, you know, Ann Coulter. You've got all of these people expressing concerns about what's happening on immigration. Again, these people who really support the deportation of illegal immigrants. Same thing here. You can't point to left-wingers on this one. I mean, maybe that works in a tiny bubble, but it does not work with anybody that's ever served in uniform. It doesn't work for anybody who's a traditional conservative, who's a real conservative on military issues. And that's why I really am surprised. We brought up before people that served in the military, like Tom Cotton, who I think was told he enlisted after going to Harvard undergrad and Harvard Law School. And then you've got Dave McCormick, who served in the military. Lindsey Graham served in the military. These are all people who understand. This is not a close call. This is dangerous for men and women in uniform. And, you know, if they're not speaking out loudly, I certainly hope they're sending a message to the White House. This is just simply unacceptable.
They all know. They all know. Pete Hegseth knows, as you suggest, that this is bad, that you cannot put attack plans in a friends and family open source group chat, an app on your phone. You can't do that. They know that. And as we've been saying for the last several weeks, these are many of them first in line to attack Hillary Clinton for having a server at her home in New York. So they all know. And I just go back to the beginning of this. What you said on day one is, if you just said we screwed up.
Right.
This was a mistake.
That's it.
This will not happen again. And now this is what, month two of this story, and now the second beat of it comes out. There would be forgiveness, I think, in most quarters. Of course. Many quarters. They would say, that cannot happen again. Right. We screwed up. That's it.
So can't happen again. We screwed up. So when we find out concurrently that it happened at the same time, we find that out a month or two later, then you can say, like we said before, terrible mistake will never happen again. We certainly learned our lesson. And it's the same thing with Abrego Garcia. Like, it's very easy. They've already said, we made a mistake. So they're continuing this out. And again, I know some people in the White House saying, hey, this is great for us. Well, no, it's not, when Joe Rogan goes on like a 3 or 4 minute rant talking to all the people that supposedly helped Donald Trump get elected, going, this is really frightening. This is really terrible. This is a bad, bad thing. We are turning into monsters. And you know what he's saying? We can't turn into monsters to defeat. Again, these are sort of own goals. No need to do this. You screwed up. We've learned our lesson. Won't do it again. And with Abrego Garcia also, it's very simple. Okay, you're right. We messed up. Shouldn't have sent him to El Salvador. Honduras has decided to accept him. Boom. It's done.
But the President Trump and his ethos, first time around, and even more so this time, has never admitted a mistake, never backed down, whether it is about Abrego Garcia. We know that New York Times had reporting last week that their escalation in their fight with Harvard was done by mistake. It was a letter that was inadvertently sent.
Yeah, what are they going to do? By the way, what are they going to do on that? We haven't covered that enough. But somebody screwed up, sent that letter to Harvard, And what are they doing?
Right now, they're not backing off. They took the mistaken letter as their position, and now they're fighting on those grounds. And Harvard last night announced that they're suing the administration about those funds in question. And now there's this, where they have simply not admit a mistake about the improper use of Signal. The group started by National Security Advisor Waltz, and at the same time, this one started by Defense Secretary Hegseth. And now
people's answer to that would be, well, you did, and you had some success with that last year until you ran into Luka when he was a Dallas Maverick, and he beat y'all to death in the conference finals, which propelled the Dallas Mavericks to the NBA.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, let's talk about him. He's facing some backlash after sources confirmed to CBS News that he shared plans about impending airstrikes in Yemen in a second Signal group chat. The group chat reportedly included his wife, his brother, and his personal attorney. I want to bring in CBS News senior national correspondent Charlie D'Agata, who's at the Pentagon for us this morning.